Single Dad returned to his house 3 years after fire, and what he found inside. Michael Carter felt his heart beating fast as he drove down the dirt road leading to the lot where his house once stood. 3 years had passed since that terrible night, and he still woke up some early mornings with the smell of smoke in his nostrils and the sound of desperate screams echoing in his mind. His children were quiet in the back seat. Joshua, now 8 years old, looked out the window with wide eyes, trying to recognize the landscape that had changed so much during the time they lived in the city. Meanwhile, Emily, 5 years old, swung her little legs and hummed softly a song she had learned at school, oblivious to the tension that gripped her father. "Daddy, is it still far?" asked the girl, interrupting her own musical thoughts. "We're here, Princess," replied Michael, slowing the car down. As he turned the curve, Michael hit the brakes abruptly. Where before there were only blackened rubble and overgrown weeds, now stood a structure that seemed familiar, yet different. New exposed brick walls rose where the living room used to be, and a covering of red roof tiles protected what was once the children's bedroom. "Daddy, isn't that our house?" asked Joshua, pointing to the construction. Michael got out of the car in silence, walking slowly toward the gate. His hands trembled as he observed every detail of the work. Piles of construction materials were organized in one corner of the lot, and clean tools rested on an improvised table made of planks and sawhorses. The smell of fresh paint, mixed with new cement, invaded his nostrils, contrasting brutally with his memories of the night he had forgotten a pot on the stove, causing the fire that destroyed not only his house, but also his marriage to Jennifer. "There's someone here!" shouted Emily, running toward the main entrance. An elderly woman emerged from inside the structure, carrying a bucket with leftover cement paste. Her grey hair was tied in a simple bun, and her modest clothes were dirty with lime and paint. When she saw Michael standing at the entrance, she dropped the bucket on the ground and approached slowly, wiping her hands on an old cloth. "Michael, you came back," she said, her voice laden with an emotion he couldn't identify. "Mrs. Dorothy." Michael blinked several times, trying to process the information. "You've lived next door for over 20 years, I remember you. But what are you doing on my property?" The woman lowered her eyes for a moment, as if gathering courage to speak. Her calloused hands revealed months of hard work, something unthinkable for a lady who was already past 70. I was fixing a few things for you," she murmured, avoiding looking directly into his eyes. "Fixing? Mrs. Dorothy, you're rebuilding my house." Michael's voice came out louder than he intended. "Who ordered this? Who is paying for all this?" The children approached, curious about the adults' conversation. Joshua looked admiringly at the new walls, while Emily hid partially behind her father's leg, watching the unfamiliar woman with her large, expressive eyes. "No one ordered it. It was me," confessed Mrs. Dorothy, her voice coming out almost in a whisper. "I used all my savings to buy the materials and hired Tony to help with what I couldn't do alone." Michael felt a mixture of gratitude and irritation taking over his chest. On one hand, seeing his old house taking shape again awakened a hope he thought he had buried forever. On the other, his dignity as a working man rebelled against the idea of accepting charity. "But why?" he asked, his voice softer now. "Why would you do this for us?" Mrs. Dorothy looked at the children, and a sad smile formed on her lips. She bent down to Emily's height and reached out to gently touch the girl's face. "Because you remind me of the family I lost a long time ago," she said, her voice choked. "When I saw you three suffering after the fire, I saw in you Paul, my husband, and my children who left too soon." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. He vaguely knew of the tragedy that had marked his neighbor's life years ago, but he had never spoken with her about it. "Mrs. Dorothy, I can't accept this," he said, gesturing toward the house. "It must have cost a fortune. How will I ever pay you back?" "I don't want any payment," she replied firmly. "What I want is to see these children playing in the yard again, to hear their laughter filling this place with life. That will repay any effort I made." Joshua let go of his father's hand and walked over to one of the new walls, running his palm over the rough bricks. His eyes shone with an excitement Michael hadn't seen in years. "Daddy, can we go inside to see how it's looking?" the boy asked. Before Michael could answer, the sound of a car coming up the dirt road caught everyone's attention. A blue Accord stopped next to Michael's car, and an elegant woman got out of the vehicle. When she turned around, Michael felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. "Jennifer," he murmured, disbelieving. It was his ex-wife, the mother of his children, the woman who had left 3 years ago and never given any news. She was thinner than he remembered, and wore clothes that seemed too expensive for her old standards. Her hair was cut in a modern style, and she seemed nervous as she approached the group. "Hi, Michael," she said, her voice hesitant. "I heard you were back, and I needed to see you." Emily hid completely behind her father upon seeing the strange woman, while Joshua watched the scene with confusion written on his face. The older child held some fragmented memories of his mother, but Emily was too little when the separation happened. "What do you want here, Jennifer?" Michael's voice came out colder than he intended. "After 3 years without a word, you just show up out of nowhere." Mrs. Dorothy watched the tension growing between the former couple and discreetly stepped away a few paces, taking the children with her to show them other corners of the property. "I know I have no right to be here," admitted Jennifer, her hands trembling slightly. "But I never stopped loving you. I never stopped thinking about coming back." "Then why didn't you come back?" asked Michael, crossing his arms over his chest. 3 years, Jennifer. 3 years your daughters asked for you every night before bed." "Because I was afraid," she confessed, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Afraid that you would hate me. Afraid I couldn't forgive you for what happened. Afraid that I wouldn't be a good mother to them." Michael felt his anger mix with a familiar pain. The guilt over the fire still haunted him daily, and hearing Jennifer confirm that she blamed him for everything only intensified that feeling. "And now?" he asked. "What changed?" "I changed," she said, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I went to therapy, Michael. For 2 years. I understood that running away solved nothing. It only hurt everyone more." Mrs. Dorothy returned with the children, who seemed excited about exploring the construction site. Joshua ran to his father to tell him about the new rooms being built, oblivious to the tension between the adults. "Daddy, Aunt Dorothy said there's going to be a room just for me and another just for Emily," exclaimed the boy, "and a big porch in the front." Jennifer watched her son speak, and her eyes filled with tears again. It was evident the children had grown so much during her absence, and that she had missed important moments of their lives. "Emily, do you remember Mommy?" asked Jennifer, bending down to the little girl's level. The child hid behind her father again, only peeking at the woman with curiosity. It was clear she held no clear memories of her mother. "She was 2 when you left," explained Michael, his voice heavy with hurt. "Of course she doesn't remember." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. The awkwardness of the situation was broken when Mrs. Dorothy called everyone's attention. "Sorry to interrupt, but I think you should see something," she said, heading into the house under construction. The group followed her, stepping carefully on planks laid on the ground to make walking easier. "In what would be the main room, Mrs. Dorothy pointed to a wooden box sitting on a makeshift table. "I found this buried in the backyard when I was digging the foundation for the new bathroom," she explained. "It was protected by plastic, so it didn't get wet from the rain all these years." Michael approached the box curiously. When he opened it, he found important documents he thought were lost forever in the fire. The children's birth certificates, the house deed, some family photos, and even some drawings Joshua had made before the tragedy. "This is incredible," he murmured, carefully leafing through the papers. "I thought I had lost all of this." "That's not all," said Mrs. Dorothy, her voice growing quieter. "There's something you need to know about me, about why I decided to help you." She took a deep breath before continuing, as if preparing to reveal something very personal. "This plot next door where I live wasn't originally mine. It belonged to my husband Paul's family. When he and our 2 sons passed away in that accident, his family rejected me. They said a woman alone had no right to keep the land." Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, surprised by the revelation. "It was your grandfather, Michael, Mr. Henry, who took me in. He sold me the plot next door for the price I could afford at the time, which was almost nothing. He told me every woman deserves a place to mourn her losses in peace. My grandfather never told me that story, said Michael, genuinely surprised. He was a discreet man. He did good without fanfare, continued Mrs. Dorothy, so when I saw you losing everything, I remembered his kindness and thought it was my turn to repay the kindness I received. Jennifer, who had remained quiet until then, approached the box and took out some old family photos. In one of them, she appeared pregnant with Emily, smiling next to Michael in the same backyard that was now being rebuilt. I remember when we took this picture, she said softly. It was the last birthday we all spent together before the fire. The mention of happy memories made the atmosphere even more emotionally charged. Joshua approached his mother to see the photos, and gradually his memories began to be awakened. "Mommy, you're in this picture with a big belly," he exclaimed, pointing to one of the images. "I was pregnant with Emily," explained Jennifer, looking lovingly at her younger daughter, who remained shy. The moment was interrupted when Mrs. Dorothy began to feel unwell. She leaned on the table and brought her hand to her forehead, clearly dizzy. "Mrs. Dorothy, are you all right?" asked Michael, quickly approaching. "It's just a bit of tiredness," she murmured, but her paleness worried everyone. Jennifer, demonstrating her maternal instincts, helped the elderly woman sit in a nearby chair. She carefully observed Mrs. Dorothy's face, noting signs that worried her. "When was the last time you ate something?" asked Jennifer. "Early this morning, or maybe last night." "I don't remember exactly," admitted the elderly woman. Michael noticed that the woman was dedicating herself to the reconstruction project with an intensity that was harming her own health. Guilt hit him like a punch in the stomach. "Mrs. Dorothy, you need to rest. Let me take you home," he offered. No, I still have to finish lowering the wall in Emily's room today," she protested, trying to stand up. "You're not finishing anything today," Jennifer interrupted firmly. "You are going to rest and I am going to prepare a proper meal." Jennifer's natural authority surprised Michael. During the years of marriage, she had always been more delicate and dependent. Now she demonstrated a strength and determination he didn't remember seeing before. "Jennifer, you don't have an obligation to—" Michael began. "Yes, I do," she cut him off. "This woman spent months rebuilding my children's home while I was away, feeling like a victim. It's the least I can do." Mrs. Dorothy watched the interaction between the former couple with a faint but satisfied smile. It was as if she could see something they themselves hadn't yet realized. "If you'll allow me a suggestion," she said softly, "perhaps it would be good for you to talk while I rest. 3 years is a long time to hold on to grudges." The children, who had lost interest in the adults' conversation, were exploring other corners of the property. Their laughter echoed across the land, creating a soundtrack that contrasted with the tension between their parents. Michael helped Mrs. Dorothy walk to her house, which was just a few meters away. The elderly woman's small plot was well kept, with a simple but colorful flower garden. The house itself was modest but cozy. When he returned, he found Jennifer sitting on the steps of the house under construction, watching the children play. She seemed lost in thought, as if trying to memorize every detail of that moment. "They've grown so much," she said when Michael approached. "They have," he agreed, sitting down beside her, but maintaining a respectful distance. "Joshua looks like you when you were a child," she continued. "And Emily. She has my eyes, but your determination—" Michael watched the children for a few minutes before speaking. "It was hard alone," he admitted, "especially at the beginning. Joshua asked so many questions about you and I never knew what to say." "And now? Does he still ask questions?" "Sometimes, but less than before. I think he's gotten used to the idea that it's just the 3 of us." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with 3 years of unspoken words and unhealed wounds. Jennifer nervously fidgeted with her hands, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Michael, I need you to know that leaving was the hardest thing I've ever done," she finally said. "But back then I couldn't look at you or this house without reliving that terrible night." "You weren't the only one reliving that night," Michael replied, his voice heavy with hurt. "I went through it too. The difference is, I couldn't run away because I had 2 small children to care for. I know. And I know I was a coward, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. But I was destroyed, Michael. I couldn't stop thinking about what could have happened if the children had been sleeping when the fire started. The mention of what could have happened made Michael shudder. It was a thought that constantly tormented him, especially during the sleepless early mornings of the first months after the fire. But they were fine, he said softly. They were playing at your mother's house, remember? We came out unharmed. Physically, yes. But emotionally, Joshua had nightmares for months, Michael, and I felt responsible for not being there to protect them somehow. Michael turned to look directly at her. For the first time in years, he could see genuine vulnerability in her eyes, instead of the anger and accusation that had marked the last months of their marriage. Jennifer, why did you come back now? He asked. After so long, what changed? She took a deep breath before answering. My therapist asked me a question a few weeks ago that made me rethink everything, she said. She asked if I was honoring the memory of our family by running away from it, or if I was just perpetuating the damage the fire had already caused. And what was your answer? That I was being selfish, that I was choosing my own suffering instead of fighting for the family that still existed. Michael felt something stirring in his chest, a mix of hope and caution he hadn't felt in a long time. Jennifer, I won't lie to you. It was very hard to explain to the children why their mother had left, especially when I didn't understand it myself. I understand if you don't want to forgive me, she said quickly. I understand if the children can't accept me back, but I had to try. I needed to show that I've changed. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the conversation. Mrs. Dorothy was walking slowly toward them, looking a little better after resting. Sorry to interrupt, she said, but I thought you might like to see something. She was carrying a folder of old papers, yellowed with age. These are the original blueprints of the house, the ones Michael's father made when he built this place, she explained. I thought they might be useful for finishing the reconstruction. Michael took the papers carefully, observing the detailed drawings made decades ago by his father. It was moving to see the plans of the house where he grew up, the place where he later raised his own family. How did you get these blueprints? He asked. Your father gave me a copy years ago when I was planning an extension on my house. He said I could use it as a reference if I wanted to do something similar, explained Mrs. Dorothy. I kept them all these years without imagining they would one day be so important. Jennifer moved closer to see the papers over Michael's shoulder. Her proximity brought the familiar scent he hadn't smelled in years, awakening memories he had tried to bury. Look, it's exactly how I remembered, she said softly, pointing to the drawing of the kitchen. With that big table in the middle where we had coffee every morning. The children, drawn by the conversation, approached the group of adults. Joshua looked at the drawings with interest, trying to understand what they represented. Daddy, is that our house? He asked. It's the blueprint of our old house, son. It shows how it was before the fire, explained Michael. Emily, still shy in Jennifer's presence, partially hid behind Mrs. Dorothy, who had become a kind of comforting maternal figure for the girl. Mrs. Dorothy, you've been like a grandmother to them, observed Jennifer. I can see it in the way Emily trusts you. They've brought me joy on very lonely days, admitted the elderly woman. Especially in the last few months, having a purpose has given me the strength to get out of bed every morning. Michael noticed something in the way she said it, a melancholy that went beyond the normal loneliness of a widow. Mrs. Dorothy, may I ask you something? Are you feeling well health-wise? He asked delicately. The elderly woman hesitated for a moment before answering. At my age, some days are better than others, she said vaguely, but don't worry about me. I want to finish this project before I can't help anymore. The way she ended the sentence left everyone worried, but she quickly changed the subject before they could ask more questions. What's important now is deciding what to do with the house, she said. Michael, do you plan to move back here? It was a question Michael had avoided answering for himself during the entire trip back. Returning meant confronting painful memories, but it also represented the chance to give the children the stability of a home of their own. I'm still thinking, he admitted. It depends on many things. Jennifer understood. It was an answer directed mainly at her. Michael's decision largely depended on whether she really intended to stay or if she would disappear again. "Michael, I want to stay," she said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "I want to try to rebuild our family, if you'll give me that chance." "Jennifer," he began, but she interrupted him. "I know it won't be easy. I know the children will need time to trust me again. I know you have every right to reject me after what I did. But I've changed, Michael, and I'm willing to prove it." "Mrs." Dorothy watched the scene with a discreet smile, as if seeing something she had long expected to happen. "Perhaps," she said softly, "you should give each other a chance. Life is too short to waste time on pride." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with orange hues that reflected on the new walls of the house. It was an almost magical moment, with the children playing in the backyard and the adults finally having an honest conversation about the future. "Daddy," called Joshua, running toward the group, "can I sleep here tonight? I want to see what the house is like at night." The child's innocent question brought up an important practical issue: where everyone would sleep that night. "The house still doesn't have electricity, son," explained Michael, "and there are no beds or anything like that." "I have sleeping bags in my car," offered Jennifer. "I brought them thinking that maybe you'd let me stay at least one night." Michael was surprised that she had prepared for this possibility. It was a sign she had thought carefully about her return. It wasn't an impulsive decision. "Jennifer, did you come prepared to stay?" he asked. "I brought some basic things in the car," she admitted. "Sleeping bags, food, flashlights. I hoped you'd give me at least a chance to show I've changed." Mrs. Dorothy slowly stood up, leaning on a cane Michael hadn't noticed before. "I'll let you sort this out as a family," she said, "but if you need anything, you know where to find me." "Mrs. Dorothy, thank you so much for everything," said Michael, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "I don't know how I'll ever repay such generosity." "Just promise me one thing," she asked, pausing before leaving. "Don't let pride destroy a second chance at happiness. Life gives us few opportunities to start over." With those words, she slowly walked away toward her house, leaving the family alone for the first time in 3 years. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer just filled with tension, but also with possibilities. The children continued playing, unaware of the weight of the moment their parents were experiencing. "Michael," Jennifer said softly, "I know I've asked a lot by showing up like this, but can I at least stay tonight so we can talk more calmly?" He looked at the children, who seemed more relaxed and happy than he had seen them in a long time. Joshua was showing Emily the different rooms of the house under construction, explaining where everything would go when they finished. "You can stay," he finally said. "But Jennifer, if you're going to stay, I need you to understand one thing. The children are my absolute priority. I won't let them get hurt again." "I understand," she replied quickly. And I completely agree. They should always come first." "All right, then let's go get those things from your car and figure out how we can get organized for tonight." While Michael and Jennifer set up an improvised camp in what would be the living room, the children explored every corner of the property. Emily gradually began to loosen up more in her mother's presence, especially after Jennifer started helping her look for interesting bugs in the garden. "Look, Mommy, a ladybug," the girl shouted excitedly, momentarily forgetting her shyness. It was the first time she had called Jennifer Mommy since her return, and the impact of that simple word was visible on the woman's face. Silent tears streamed down her cheeks as she bent down to observe the tiny insect with her daughter. "It's very pretty," said Jennifer, her voice choked. "Ladybugs bring good luck, you know." "They do?" asked Emily, her eyes shining with curiosity. "Yes, they do. My grandmother always said that when a ladybug lands on you, it's a sign that good things are coming." Michael watched the scene from a distance, feeling his heart warm for the first time in years. Seeing Jennifer interacting naturally with the children stirred memories of happier times, when they were a close and complete family. As evening approached, they improvised a campfire in the backyard, using some leftover pieces of wood from the construction. The children were fascinated by the dancing flames, and Joshua began to tell made-up stories about imaginary adventures. "Once upon a time there was a brave boy who lived in a magical house," he began, gesturing dramatically. "The house had the power to rebuild itself whenever something bad happened." "What do you mean, rebuild itself?" asked Emily, completely engrossed in her brother's story. "Well, there was a good fairy who took care of the house," Joshua invented. "Every time the family was sad, the fairy worked during the night to make everything new again." Jennifer and Michael exchanged a look over the children's heads, both recognizing how Joshua was processing recent events through fantasy. "And what happened to the family in the story?" Jennifer asked softly. "They learned that the house wasn't magic. It was the people who cared about them that made the magic happen," said Joshua, with the innocent wisdom of children. Michael felt a lump in his throat. His 8-year-old son had grasped something he himself was struggling to accept, that Mrs. Dorothy's kindness wasn't an incomprehensible miracle, but rather a conscious, generous act of love. "That's a very beautiful story, son," said Michael. "And a very wise one, too." When it was time to sleep, they arranged the sleeping bags in the living room under construction, which already had its roof finished. Jennifer insisted on staying a little apart from the others, respecting the boundaries the situation imposed. The children fell asleep quickly, tired after a day full of emotions and discoveries. Michael and Jennifer remained awake, lying in silence and looking at the starry sky through an opening in the roof where a skylight would later be installed. "Michael," Jennifer whispered after a long silence, "can I tell you what really happened to me during those 3 years?" He turned to look at her in the dark, seeing only the outline of her face illuminated by the moon. "You can tell me," he said softly. "In the first few months, I was very angry. Angry at you, angry at myself, angry at the whole world. I rented a small apartment in the city and spent weeks just sleeping and crying." Michael listened in silence, finally getting the chance to understand what had happened to the woman he had loved. "Then I started working at a clothing store. It was only a few hours a day, but it gave me a reason to get out of bed. The owner of the store, Sandra, was the one who suggested I seek professional help." "And did you?" asked Michael. "It took me another 6 months to gather the courage. But when I finally went, it was the best decision I ever made. I learned I was suffering from severe depression, not just sadness over the fire." Michael didn't know she had gone through mental health struggles. During the marriage, Jennifer had always seemed strong and balanced, handling everyday life's problems more easily than he did. "The therapist helped me understand that I had associated you and the children with the trauma of the fire. It was as if looking at you constantly reminded me of how close we came to losing everything," she continued. "And how did you overcome that?" "It wasn't easy. It took almost 2 years of therapy for me to separate the traumatic event from the people I love, to understand that running away from you wasn't going to make the pain disappear." Michael felt an unexpected compassion growing in his chest. All these years, he had imagined Jennifer living a new and happy life, free from the responsibilities and pain he faced alone. Knowing she had also suffered changed his perspective on the abandonment. "Jennifer, did you write? Did you send letters? Anything?" he asked. "I wrote hundreds of letters," she admitted. "But I never sent any. I always thought they weren't enough, that they couldn't express what I truly felt." "Do you still have those letters?" "I do. They're in a box in my apartment. Every birthday of the children, every Christmas, every important milestone, I would write trying to explain why I wasn't there." Michael closed his eyes, imagining Jennifer alone writing letters to the family she had left behind. The image brought more pain than anger, different from what he had expected. "Jennifer, can you answer one thing honestly?" "Of course." "If it weren't for Mrs. Dorothy's project, would you have ever come back, or would you have just kept writing letters you'd never send?" She was silent for a long time before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe yes, maybe no. But when I found out you were coming back here, I realized it was my last chance to try and fix things. If I let you rebuild your lives here without me, it would be like accepting that our family was over forever. And you can't accept that? I can't accept it. Not without trying to rebuild what I destroyed." The sound of the children's quiet breathing as they slept created a comforting soundtrack for that intimate conversation. For the first time in 3 years, Michael allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have his family whole again. "Jennifer, if we try to start over, it can't be like before," he said carefully. "A lot has changed. I've changed, the children have changed. We can't just pretend these 3 years didn't happen." "I understand," she replied. "I'm not expecting things to go back to how they were. I'm asking for the chance for us to build something new together. It will take time. The children will need to get used to you again, and I'll need to learn to trust you again." "I have time," she said firmly, "and patience. I know I'll have to prove every day that I've changed, that I won't run away again." Michael looked at the stars through the opening in the ceiling, thinking of all the lonely nights over the past 3 years when he had looked at the same sky, wishing things were different. "Okay," he said finally. "We can try. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. The next morning, Michael woke to the sound of low voices coming from outside the house. Opening his eyes, he noticed Jennifer was no longer in her sleeping bag. Worried she might have left during the night, he quickly got up and went out to investigate. He found her in the backyard talking quietly with Mrs. Dorothy, who had arrived early carrying a basket with bread and fresh fruit. "Good morning, Michael," greeted Mrs. Dorothy with a smile. "I brought you breakfast." "Good morning, Mrs. Dorothy. You really didn't have to go to the trouble," said Michael, still a bit sleepy. "It was no trouble at all. In fact, Jennifer was helping me plan what still needs to be done around the house," the elderly woman explained. Michael looked at Jennifer with surprise. She was dressed in simple, practical clothes, with her hair tied back in a ponytail, looking ready to work. "I thought I could help with the construction," explained Jennifer. "If I'm going to stay, I want to contribute somehow." "Jennifer, do you know anything about construction?" asked Michael, genuinely curious. "I learned a few things over the years," she said, seeming a little embarrassed. "When you're living alone and short on money, you learn to fix things yourself." Mrs. Dorothy nodded approvingly. "She showed me some very interesting techniques for wall finishing," said the elderly woman. "She'll be a great help." The children woke up, drawn by the smell of hot coffee and fresh bread. Emily ran straight to Mrs. Dorothy, who had become her favorite person, while Joshua watched with interest the tools the women had organized. "Dad, can I help too?" asked the boy. "Of course, son, but only with tasks that aren't dangerous," replied Michael. During the improvised breakfast, sitting on planks supported by sawhorses, the atmosphere was curiously familiar. It was as if they were a real family again, sharing a meal and planning the day together. "Mrs. Dorothy, may I ask how much longer until it's finished?" questioned Michael. "Well, the main structure is practically done. What's left are the finishes: painting, flooring, electrical and plumbing work," she explained. "With more people helping, maybe a month or 2. Michael did some quick mental calculations. He had some savings from the last few years, but he didn't know if it would be enough for the remaining materials. "About the costs," he began. "We've already talked about that," Mrs. Dorothy gently interrupted. "What matters now is finishing soon so you can settle in here." "But Mrs. Dorothy—" "Michael," she cut in, her voice growing more serious. "Let an old woman have the pleasure of doing something good before she leaves this world." The way she said it, again with that special melancholy, made Michael suspect there was something she wasn't telling about her health. Jennifer seemed to notice the same thing. "Mrs. Dorothy, have you been going to the doctor regularly?" she asked delicately. The elderly woman hesitated before answering, looking at the children playing nearby. "At my age, doctors only give bad news," she said evasively. "I prefer to spend my time on more productive things." Michael and Jennifer exchanged a look, both understanding that Mrs. Dorothy was avoiding a conversation about her health condition in front of the children. "Mrs. Dorothy, how about if I accompanied you to an appointment?" offered Jennifer. "Sometimes it's good to have company at times like that." "That's kind of you, dear, but it's not necessary," replied the elderly woman, quickly changing the subject. "What we need to decide are the paint colors for the bedrooms. The rest of the day was dedicated to work on the house." Michael was surprised to see how Jennifer had really learned basic construction techniques. She could skillfully make recesses in the wall and knew different types of joint compound. "Where did you learn this?" he asked as they worked side by side on a kitchen wall. "The landlady of the boarding house where I stayed for a while was always renovating something," Jennifer explained. "Since I paid low rent, I helped with repairs as part of the payment." "Boarding house?" "Yes. For the first 2 years I lived in a women's boarding house. It was cheap and gave me a chance to save money." Michael realized Jennifer had lived much more modestly than he had imagined. All this time he had created a fantasy that she was living a comfortable life away from family responsibilities. "Was it difficult?" he asked. "Very," she admitted, "especially at the beginning. There were nights I cried so much that other boarders would come knock on my door to see if I was okay." "Jennifer, can you answer me one thing?" "Of course." "All this time, did you think about other families? About starting over with someone else?" She stopped working and looked him directly in the eyes. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a second. You were always my only real family." The work continued in silence for a while, but it was a more comfortable silence now, without the tension of previous days. The children helped by carrying small materials and painting pieces of wood with old brushes and water, having enormous fun. In the late afternoon, as they were putting away the tools, an unfamiliar car came up the road toward the property. Michael didn't recognize the vehicle or the man who got out of it. The visitor was a well-dressed, middle-aged man carrying a briefcase. He looked around the property with obvious interest before approaching the group. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Mr. Michael Carter," he said formally. "That's me," replied Michael, approaching cautiously. "My name is Richard Thompson. I'm a real estate agent. I represent an urban development company that is interested in acquiring properties in this region." Michael felt a chill in his stomach. Financial problems had forced him to consider various options during his years in the city, including the possibility of selling the land. "What kind of interest?" asked Michael cautiously. "We are developing a luxury housing estate in the area. Your property is in a strategic location that interests us greatly," explained Richard, taking some papers from his briefcase. Jennifer approached, sensing the tension in Michael's voice. "I'm not interested in selling," said Michael quickly. "I understand, Mr. Carter, but I'd like you to see our proposal before making a final decision," insisted Richard, extending the papers. "It's a very generous offer." Michael took the documents reluctantly, but when he saw the amount offered, his eyes widened. It was a sum significantly larger than he imagined the land was worth. "Is this amount correct?" he asked, doubting what he saw. "Perfectly correct," confirmed Richard. "The area is appreciating rapidly due to the new mall and medical complex that will be built nearby." Jennifer looked over Michael's shoulder to see the numbers, and her expression also showed surprise. "That's a lot of money," she murmured. "Yes, it is," agreed Richard. "Enough for you to buy a nice house in the city and still have a substantial nest egg for the children's future." Mrs. Dorothy, who had remained quiet until then, approached the group. "If you'll allow an old neighbor's opinion," she said softly, "money can't buy all the important things in life." "With all due respect, ma'am, we're talking about a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," Richard replied politely. "Mr. Carter has a family to care for. He needs to think about the practical future." "I need to think about this," said Michael, handing back the papers. "I won't make such an important decision on the spot." "Of course I understand perfectly," said Richard, but Michael noticed a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "But I'd like you to know this offer has a deadline. Our investors won't wait indefinitely." "How much time do I have?" asked Michael. 2 weeks would be ideal," replied Richard. "After that, I can't guarantee we'll maintain the same value." After the agent left, a heavy silence settled among the adults. The children, who had lost interest in the conversation when they realized it was grown-up talk, continued playing in the backyard. "Michael, are you considering the offer?" asked Jennifer worriedly. "I don't know," he admitted. "It's a lot of money, Jennifer. More than I could save in a decade of working." "But this place is our home," she argued. "It's where the children were born, where you grew up." "Our home was destroyed in a fire 3 years ago," Michael replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. What we're rebuilding here are just walls and a roof." Mrs. Dorothy discreetly stepped away to give the couple privacy, but Michael called her back. "Mrs. Dorothy, I'd like to hear your opinion," he said. "You've lived here your whole life. What would you do in my place?" The elderly woman looked around the property, observing the house under construction, the children playing, the family trying to come together again. "Michael, can I tell you something about value?" she said. "When I lost my Paul and my boys, many people told me to sell our house and start a new life somewhere else. They said it would be easier to overcome the pain away from the memories." "And why didn't you sell?" "Because I realized the painful memories weren't in the house. They were inside me. And the good memories. Those I wanted to preserve forever," she explained. "Besides, this place gave me something no money can buy. The chance to rebuild a family that wasn't mine by blood, but that I chose to love." Michael felt a lump in his throat. The old woman's simple wisdom touched on issues he had been struggling to resolve alone. "But the financial situation," he began. "Son, you've already survived 3 years in the city. If you've made it this far, you can keep going. And here, at least, you won't pay rent," said Mrs. Dorothy pragmatically. Jennifer took Michael's hand gently. "Michael, if money is the concern, I can work. I can contribute to the family expenses," she offered. "Jennifer, it's not just that," he said, pulling away slightly. What if we can't make this work? What if we try to rebuild our family and fail? At least with the money from the sale, I could give the children a better life. Or you could have money in the bank and children who grew up without roots, without a place to call home," Jennifer retorted. "Michael, some bets in life are worth taking." "Easy to say when you haven't carried the responsibility alone for 3 years, said Michael, his frustration finally spilling over. "Easy to talk about bets when you can leave again if things get tough." The comment hit Jennifer like a slap. She stepped back a few paces, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Michael, I deserve that," she said, her voice choked. "I deserve your distrust, but I need you to believe I won't leave again." "How can I believe that?" he asked, his voice louder now. "You gave me your word before at the altar, and still you left when things got tough." Mrs. Dorothy watched the argument with sadness, recognizing that 3 years of pain were finally coming to the surface. The children stopped playing, sensing the tension in their father's voice. Joshua approached cautiously, worried. "Daddy, are you angry?" asked the boy. Michael realized he was frightening the children and took a deep breath, trying to control himself. "No, son, Daddy is just discussing some complicated things with Mommy," he said, crouching down to the child's level. "Are you going to separate again?" Joshua asked directly, his big eyes full of worry. The innocent question hit both Michael and Jennifer with full force. It was the first time Joshua had verbalized his fears about the family situation. "We don't want to separate, son," Jennifer replied quickly, kneeling beside Michael. "We're just trying to work out some grown-up problems." "What kind of problems?" the boy insisted. Michael and Jennifer exchanged a look, realizing they needed to give an honest but age-appropriate answer. "Daddy is worried about money and work," Jennifer explained, "and he's also worried about whether Mommy will stay with you forever or leave again." "And are you leaving?" Joshua asked his mother directly. "I'm not," Jennifer said firmly, looking into her son's eyes. "I'm never leaving again, I promise." "But you promised before," Joshua said, with the brutal honesty of children. Jennifer felt her son's words like knives to her chest. It was true. She had promised many things before she left. "You're right, son. Mommy broke promises before," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But now I'm a different person. I learned that promises are very serious things, that we shouldn't make them if we aren't sure we can keep them." "And are you sure now?" asked Joshua. "I am," Jennifer replied without hesitation. "I am absolutely sure." Michael watched the conversation between mother and son, seeing genuine sincerity in Jennifer's eyes. For the first time since she had returned, he seriously considered the possibility that she had truly changed. Emily, who had stayed quiet throughout the conversation, approached Jennifer and gently touched her arm. "Mommy, are you going to sleep here again tonight?" the girl asked in her sweet voice. "If Daddy allows it," Jennifer replied, looking at Michael. "You can stay," he said after a pause. "But we need to keep talking about these things after the children are asleep." The rest of the day passed in a calmer, though still tense atmosphere. Mrs. Dorothy stayed for dinner, which consisted of simple sandwiches and juice made with the ingredients Jennifer had brought. During the meal, the conversation focused on lighter topics: the stories Joshua made up, the discoveries Emily was making in the garden, the memories Mrs. Dorothy shared about the area. "Did you know this property once grew the best mangoes in the region?" the elderly woman recounted. "Michael's father had a huge mango tree right there where the pile of bricks is now." "What happened to the tree?" asked Joshua, interested. "The fire got it too," Michael explained. "We had to cut down what was left because it was diseased." "Can we plant another one?" Emily suggested. "Yes, we can," Jennifer said quickly. "If we stay here, one of the first things we'll do is plant a new mango tree." Michael noticed how she said, "if we stay," leaving the decision open. It was a sign that she respected his position as the final decision-maker for the family. When it was time for Mrs. Dorothy to go home, she said goodbye with affectionate hugs for the children and a meaningful handshake for Michael and Jennifer. "Remember what we talked about second chances," she said softly before leaving. After the children fell asleep, Michael and Jennifer sat outside the house, watching the stars in silence for a few minutes. "Michael, can I ask you a question?" said Jennifer finally. "Of course." "Do you really believe I'll leave again?" Michael thought carefully before answering. "I believe you won't," he said. "But I also believe you believed you wouldn't leave the first time." "I see," she said, her voice sad. "And what can I do to prove I've changed?" "I don't know if it's something you can prove with words," admitted Michael. "I think only time will tell." "And in the meantime, will you consider selling the house?" "Jennifer, do you understand what that amount would mean for us?" he asked. "The children could study at the best schools, have all the opportunities I could never give them. Or they could grow up in a stable home with both parents, learn the value of work and family, have solid roots to build their own lives," she argued. "It's not that simple." "Why isn't it?" "Michael, you spent 3 years proving you can take care of the children alone. Why do you doubt we can do it together now?" "Because when you left, I had to rethink everything about my life," he explained. "I had to become more practical, more cautious, more focused on survival. I can't just go back to being the romantic dreamer I was before." Jennifer was silent for a moment, processing his words. "You're right," she said finally. "You've changed, and I need to accept that. I can't expect you to be the same person you were 3 years ago, just as you can't expect that from me." "Exactly. So maybe the question isn't whether we can go back to who we were, but whether we can build something new with who we've become." Michael looked at her, surprised by the maturity of the observation. "It's possible," he admitted, "but it will need to be with total honesty between us, without romanticizing what was lost, without fantasizing about what could be." "I agree," said Jennifer. "Total honesty." "Okay. Then I'll be honest with you about the sale offer," said Michael. "It's not just about the money, it's also about fear." "Fear of what?" "Fear of trying to rebuild our family and failing. Fear of discovering we're no longer compatible. Fear that the children will be hurt again in the process. And do you think selling the house would eliminate those fears? At least, it would eliminate the pressure of trying to rebuild something that perhaps can't be rebuilt," he said. "With the money, I could give the children financial stability without depending on our family working out." "Michael, can I tell you what I'm most afraid of?" asked Jennifer. "Go ahead." "I'm afraid you'll use financial security as an excuse to avoid emotional risks. I'm afraid you'd prefer to have money in the bank than to have a complete family because money is more predictable." The observation hit Michael hard because there was a kernel of truth in it he didn't want to admit. "Maybe you're right," he said after a long pause. "Maybe I'm using the practical issue to avoid dealing with the feelings." "And what would your choice be if we took the money out of the equation?" asked Jennifer. "If the offer didn't exist, would you try to rebuild our family?" Michael looked at the house under construction, lit by the moon. It was more than walls and a roof. It represented hope, a fresh start, the chance to give the children the stability of a home. "I think I would," he admitted. "I think I would try." Then maybe the money shouldn't be the deciding factor, said Jennifer softly. Maybe it should just be an extra bonus if we choose to stay. Michael chuckled softly, realizing how logically she had dismantled his resistance. You got smart during these 3 years, he said. I had to. Surviving alone teaches you many things. They stayed silent for a few more minutes, but it was a comfortable silence now, full of possibilities instead of tension. Jennifer, Michael finally said, if we're going to try this, we need to establish some rules. What kind of rules? First, total communication. If either of us is facing difficulties, we talk about it instead of keeping it to ourselves. I agree. Second, decisions about the children are made together. No one-sided decisions on important things. Makes sense. Third, if it's not working, we talk about it honestly instead of letting things deteriorate like before. Michael, can I suggest a fourth rule? Asked Jennifer. Of course. If we decide to try, we commit for at least a year. Enough time to really test if we can function as a family, without giving up at the first difficulty. Michael considered the proposal. A year seemed both very long and very short at the same time. A year, he repeated, and if it doesn't work after a year, then at least we really tried, and the children will have had the chance to know what it's like to have a complete family, said Jennifer. But Michael, if we're going to do this, we need to do it believing it will work. We can't start already planning for failure. You're right, he agreed. If we're going to try, we have to try for real. Michael extended his hand to Jennifer, and she shook it firmly. 1 year, he said. Complete family, total communication, shared decisions. 1 year, she agreed, and let's start by refusing the sale offer. We'll refuse the sale offer, confirmed Michael, feeling a mix of relief and nervousness. The next morning, Michael called Richard Thompson and communicated his decision not to sell. The agent tried to argue and even increased the offer, but Michael stood firm. I'm sure, Mr. Thompson, this property is not for sale, he said definitively before hanging up. Jennifer, who had listened to the conversation, smiled and kissed Michael on the cheek, the first affectionate physical contact between them since she had returned. Thank you, she said simply. The children received the news that they would stay on the property with evident enthusiasm. Joshua immediately started making plans for the backyard, while Emily asked when they could plant the new apple tree. Mrs. Dorothy, when she learned of the decision, couldn't hide her joy. She hugged Michael tightly, whispering a thank you in his ear that carried the weight of all her gratitude. Now that this is settled, she said, we can focus on finishing this house soon so you can move in. The work on the house gained new momentum in the following days. With Jennifer contributing effectively and the children helping where they could, progress visibly accelerated. Michael watched Jennifer working and noticed changes that went beyond the practical skills she had learned. There was a determination in her movements, a confidence that didn't exist before. 3 years of forced independence had strengthened aspects of her personality that were only potential before. One afternoon, while painting the room that would be Emily's, Jennifer made an unexpected confession. Michael, can I tell you something? All that time away, the hardest thing wasn't the loneliness or the financial difficulties. What was it then? It was waking up every day knowing I was missing unique moments in our daughters' lives. Every birthday, every first day of school, every little achievement. I was missing everything. Michael stopped painting and looked at her. Why didn't you come back sooner then? Because I was afraid to discover it was already too late. That you had gotten used to living without me and didn't need me anymore, she admitted. It took me a long time to understand that the fear of failure was stopping me from trying for success. And now? Do you still have that fear? I do. But now I know that the regret of not trying would be much worse than the fear of failing while trying. This conversation marked a turning point in the rebuilding of their relationship. Michael began to see Jennifer not as the woman who had left, but as a person who had faced her own demons and chosen to come back stronger. At the end of the week, an unexpected event would test the new family dynamic. Joshua woke up in the middle of the night with a high fever and difficulty breathing. Michael panicked, especially because the nearest town with a hospital was 40 kilometers away. Jennifer, however, remained calm. She methodically checked the child's symptoms, gave him fever reducer in the correct dosage, and prepared a humidified environment to help with his breathing. "How do you know how to do this?" asked Michael, impressed by her competence. "I worked as a caregiver's aide for the elderly for a while," she explained while monitoring Joshua's temperature. "I learned basic health care." The dedication with which Jennifer cared for her son throughout the night, singing softly to calm him and checking his temperature every hour, touched Michael deeply. It was evident that her maternal instincts had not diminished during the years of separation. In the morning, when the fever broke and Joshua was better, Michael found Jennifer asleep in the chair next to the boy's bed, still holding a damp cloth in her hand. "Jennifer," he called softly. She woke instantly, immediately checking on Joshua. "How is he?" she asked, still half asleep. "Better. The fever is down," replied Michael. "Jennifer, thank you. You saved the night." "He's my son too," she said simply. "Of course I would take care of him." But Michael knew it wasn't that simple. During the 3 years alone, he had faced several minor medical emergencies with the children, and it had always been a lonely and frightening process. Having someone share the responsibility and bring skills he didn't possess made an enormous difference. "Jennifer, I think you should know something," he said. "Seeing you take care of Joshua tonight. It was the first time in 3 years I felt like I wasn't carrying everything alone." "And how did that feel?" "Scary," he admitted. "But also relief. A lot of relief." That day, Michael realized he was beginning to trust Jennifer again, not based on promises or intentions, but on concrete actions. She had proven that, when necessary, she put the children first without hesitation. As the days passed, the family routine began to establish itself naturally. Jennifer took charge of breakfast and household chores in the morning, while Michael handled the more technical aspects of the construction. Afternoons were dedicated to working together on the house, and evenings to family time. The children adapted to their mother's constant presence more easily than Michael had anticipated. Emily, especially, began seeking Jennifer out for specific activities, like brushing hair and choosing clothes. Joshua, initially more resistant, gradually began including his mother in his play and conversations. A particularly significant moment happened when Joshua scraped his knee while playing and, on instinct, ran to Jennifer instead of his father for medical care. It was a clear sign that he was restoring his trust in his mother as a protective figure. "She kissed my boo-boo and it stopped hurting," he told Michael later, with the seriousness of a child making an important scientific discovery. Michael smiled, remembering how Jennifer had always had that magical power to heal through affection when Joshua was younger. Mrs. Dorothy watched the family's progress with evident satisfaction, but Michael noticed she was losing weight and tiring more easily each day. Her contributions to the housework had decreased drastically, and she spent more time sitting and observing than actually helping. "Mrs. Dorothy, you need to see a doctor," Michael said directly one afternoon when she almost fainted carrying a can of paint. "Michael, at my age, doctors only confirm what we already know," she replied with a weary smile. "I prefer to use the time I have left on more pleasant things. But maybe they can help with some treatment. Son, some problems don't have treatments. They only have time," she said gently. "And I choose to spend my time watching you build a new family." Michael understood she was indirectly confirming his worst fears about her health. The woman who had dedicated the last months of her life to rebuilding their house was facing her own serious medical challenges. Jennifer, sensing the situation, began spending more time caring for Mrs. Dorothy, preparing nutritious meals for her and insisting she rest more. It was a way to repay the affection the elderly woman had shown the family. "Mrs. Dorothy," Jennifer said one afternoon, "may I ask a personal question?" "Of course, dear. Do you have family, children, grandchildren, someone who should be taking care of you?" Mrs. Dorothy sighed deeply before answering. "I had 2 sons with Paul, Michael, 28, and Richard, 25. Both were taken in the same accident that took my husband," she explained. "As for Paul's family, they cut ties with me after the funeral. They said I was a stranger trying to cling to what didn't belong to me." "I'm so sorry," Jennifer said sincerely. "It was a long time ago. I learned to live with the pain, and I also learned that family isn't just who shares your blood," Mrs. Dorothy continued. You have become my chosen family. And we have chosen you too, Jennifer replied, gently touching the elderly woman's hand. This conversation strengthened the bonds between Mrs. Dorothy and the family even further. Michael and Jennifer began treating her not just as a generous neighbor, but as an adoptive grandmother for the children. As the house neared completion, the practical question arose of where Mrs. Dorothy would live when she could no longer care for herself. Her house, though cozy, lacked the necessary adaptations for someone with increasing mobility issues. It was Emily, with the innocence of children, who suggested the obvious solution. "Why doesn't Grandma Dorothy come live with us?" she asked during dinner. "Our new house is really big." Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing but hesitating to say it. "Sweetie, Grandma Dorothy's house is next door. She has her own home," Michael explained carefully. "But she gets sick sometimes," Emily insisted. "And when you get sick, you need someone to take care of you." The child's simple logic exposed a truth the adults were avoiding facing. Mrs. Dorothy needed care, and they had both the ability and the desire to provide it. "Emily is right," said Joshua, supporting his sister. "Grandma Dorothy took care of us. Now we can take care of her." Michael looked at Jennifer, who nodded almost imperceptibly. It was a decision that needed to be made, but first they needed to talk with Mrs. Dorothy herself. "Mrs. Dorothy," said Michael the next morning when he found the elderly woman resting in a chair in the backyard, "may I talk to you about something?" "Of course, son. The children suggested that you come live with us when the house is ready, and Jennifer and we would really like you to consider the idea." Mrs. Dorothy looked at him with genuine surprise. "Michael, that's very kind of you, but I can't accept. You are rebuilding your family. You don't need a sick old woman getting in the way." "You wouldn't be getting in the way," interrupted Jennifer, who had approached during the conversation. "You would be completing our family, dear." "Mrs. Dorothy, you spent months rebuilding our house," continued Jennifer. "Let us repay you by taking care of you. Besides, the children adore you. It would be good for them to have a grandmother. And it would be good for us too," added Michael. "You have taught us so much about generosity and family. We would like to keep learning." Mrs. Dorothy was silent for a few minutes, watching the children play in the backyard she had helped restore. "If I accept," she said finally, "it would only be temporarily, until I no longer need care." Michael and Jennifer understood the euphemism. Mrs. Dorothy was agreeing to live with them for the time she had left. "It will be an honor to have you with us for as long as you want to stay," said Michael sincerely. The decision to include Mrs. Dorothy permanently in the family brought a new dynamic to the house. Michael and Jennifer modified the construction plans to include a bedroom on the ground floor with a bathroom adapted for her. The work gained even more meaning now. They weren't just rebuilding a home for themselves, but creating a space where an extended family could thrive. Mrs. Dorothy, in turn, seemed to have gained new energy with the prospect of officially being part of the family. She began to share stories of the region, old recipes and traditions she wanted to pass on to the children. "Did you know this land once had an orange grove?" she told Joshua one afternoon. "Your great-grandfather planted 20 trees that bore the sweetest oranges in the area." "What happened to them?" asked the boy, fascinated. "Time and pests took most, but there is still one survivor back there on the property, hidden behind those bushes," she revealed. Michael was interested in the information. He didn't know there was still a fruit tree remaining from his grandparents' time. "Can we go see it?" asked Joshua. "Of course," said Mrs. Dorothy, slowly getting up from the chair. The group walked to the back of the property, where they indeed found an old orange tree, somewhat wild but laden with small, sweet fruit. "This is amazing," murmured Michael, tasting one of the oranges. "I didn't know it still existed." "Many things survive when they have deep roots," observed Mrs. Dorothy meaningfully. Jennifer understood the implicit message. It was a metaphor about family, about belonging, about the strength that comes from being planted in firm soil. "Can we take care of it? Prune it properly so it gets healthier?" asked Jennifer. "That would be wonderful," replied Mrs. Dorothy. "It just needs a little attention to thrive fully again." That afternoon, Michael found himself tending to the orange tree, while reflecting on the layers of symbolism in the situation. He was literally pruning sick branches from a tree that had survived decades of neglect, and metaphorically doing the same with his family. The discovery of the orange tree marked a moment of renewal on the property. Michael and Jennifer began planning the recovery of other areas of the land that had been neglected during the years of absence. "We could make a vegetable garden here," suggested Jennifer, pointing to an area with good sun exposure. "The children could learn to grow their own vegetables. And here we can plant that new mango tree that Emily wants," added Michael. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out, now continuing. The garden and vegetable patch planning became a family activity that involved everyone. Mrs. Dorothy contributed knowledge about native plants and traditional cultivation techniques. The children suggested colorful flowers and fruit trees. Michael and Jennifer focused on the practical aspects of irrigation and space distribution. "This is going to be the most beautiful garden in the area," declared Emily, with the absolute confidence of a 5-year-old. "Yes, it will, Princess," agreed Michael, kissing his daughter's forehead. The gardening work provided opportunities for important conversations between Michael and Jennifer. Working side by side, digging, planting, and watering, they rediscovered the ease of communication they had lost in recent years of marriage. "Michael, can I ask you what it was really like for you during those 3 years?" asked Jennifer as they planted tomato seedlings. "Hard," he answered honestly, "especially at the beginning. I had no idea how to be both father and mother at the same time." "What was the hardest part?" "The nights," he said after thinking for a moment. "After the children fell asleep and the house grew quiet, the loneliness was crushing." Jennifer stopped planting and looked at him. "I felt the same way," she admitted, "crushing loneliness. But mine was worse because it was self-imposed." "How so?" "You were alone because I left, but I was alone because I chose to be alone. Every night I thought of you all and knew I could be there, but I was choosing not to be. Why didn't you come back sooner?" "Pride, mostly," she confessed. "The more time passed, the harder it became to admit I had made a mistake. It was like I had dug a hole and kept digging because I didn't know how to stop." Michael understood the feeling. He himself had experienced similar dynamics in other life situations where time made it harder to correct mistakes rather than easier. "Jennifer, I need to tell you something I've never told anyone," he said suddenly. "What?" "In the first months after you left, I used to set the dinner table for 4. I knew you weren't coming, but I couldn't accept that we were only 3 now." "How long did you do that?" "Almost a year," he admitted, looking ashamed. "The children never asked about the 4th place. I think they also needed to hold on to hope in some way." Jennifer felt tears forming in her eyes as she imagined Michael and the children eating dinner in silence around a table set for someone who wouldn't arrive. "Michael, forgive me," she whispered. "Please forgive me for everything you suffered because of me." "I already have," he said, surprising himself with the sincerity of the statement. "I don't know exactly when it happened, but sometime during these last few weeks I forgave you." "How did you manage it?" "By realizing that holding on to anger was hurting me more than it was hurting you," he explained, "and by seeing who you've become. The woman who came back is stronger, more mature than the one who left. In some ways, our separation may have been necessary for both of us to grow." "Do you really believe that?" "I'm starting to believe," said Michael. "Maybe we couldn't have built the family we're building now if we hadn't gone through what we did." It was a comforting perspective, the idea that the suffering of the past years had served a greater purpose in the evolution of all of them, as people and as a family. As the house neared completion, anxiety about the move began to grow, especially for the children. They were excited about the new house but worried if things would really work as a united family. "Daddy," asked Joshua one night, "when we move to the new house, will things be like they were before?" "Not exactly like before, son," Michael replied honestly. "They'll be different, but we hope they'll be better." "Different how?" "Well, now we have Grandma Dorothy living with us, and Mommy learned many new things during the time she was away, and Daddy also learned new things taking care of you alone." "What about you, Mommy?" Emily asked Jennifer. Will you be different too? I'll still be your mother and love you more than anything, Jennifer answered. But I'll try to be a better mother than I was before. How will you be better? The girl insisted with genuine curiosity. I'll pay more attention to you when you're talking to me. I'll join in your games more, and I'll cook tastier dishes, said Jennifer, making the children laugh with the last promise. Will you make brigadeiro? Asked Joshua hopefully. I'll make brigadeiro, chocolate cake, beijinho, whatever you want, she promised. And will you stay home with us instead of working? Asked Emily. It was a complicated question, touching on important practical matters. Michael and Jennifer had talked about it, but hadn't reached a final decision yet. Mommy will need to work some hours to help with the household expenses, Michael explained, but it will be work that allows her to spend most of her time with you. What kind of work? Asked Joshua. I'm thinking of giving private lessons to children in the area, Jennifer explained. I can do it here at home during the hours you're at school. It was a plan she had developed over the last few weeks, making use of her teaching degree that had been on pause during the years of marriage and motherhood. Private tutor is cool, approved Emily. You can teach the kids to make brigadeiro too. Only if their parents let me, laughed Jennifer. The conversation about the future continued for a while longer, with the children asking practical questions and the parents trying to give honest yet reassuring answers. It was important that everyone understood that family life would be different from before, but that this difference wasn't necessarily bad. When the house was finally ready, the emotion of the moment was indescribable. Mrs. Dorothy, despite her growing weakness, insisted on participating in a small housewarming ceremony. This house was built with love, she said, standing at the front door with trembling hands resting on her cane. May it be lived in with love too. Michael carried Emily on his shoulders as they crossed the threshold for the first time as a complete family. Jennifer held Joshua's hand, and Mrs. Dorothy walked slowly but determinedly, right behind them. The interior of the house was simple but welcoming. The light walls created a feeling of spaciousness and light. The bedrooms were exactly as they had planned, one for the children to share initially, another for Michael and Jennifer, and Mrs. Dorothy's adapted room on the ground floor. It's perfect, murmured Jennifer, looking at the living room where they would gather as a family every night. It's ours, Michael said simply, and those two words carried the weight of all the months of work, all the difficult decisions, all the fears overcome. The children ran from room to room, exploring every corner of the new house, choosing where they would put their toys and books. Their laughter echoed off the walls, bringing life to the space that had been just a structure of bricks and cement for so long. "Grandma Dorothy, come see your room," shouted Emily, pulling the elderly woman by the hand. Mrs. Dorothy's room had been decorated with special care. Jennifer had sewn floral curtains, and Michael had installed shelves where she could display her old photographs and cherished objects. "It's beautiful," said the elderly woman, tears running down her wrinkled face. "I never imagined I'd have a home like this again." "This is your home now," said Michael firmly. "For as long as you want. And forever in our hearts," added Jennifer. On that first night in the new house, after the children had fallen asleep in their new beds, Michael and Jennifer sat on the porch that Mrs. Dorothy had insisted on including in the design. "We did it," said Jennifer softly. "We did it," agreed Michael. "How do you feel?" "Grateful," he replied after thinking for a moment. "Grateful for the second chance, grateful for the children, grateful for Mrs. Dorothy, grateful that you came back." "And scared?" she asked perceptively. "A little," he admitted. "Afraid that this is too good to last." "Michael, can I tell you a secret?" said Jennifer, moving closer to him on the rocking chair they had bought for the porch. "Of course." "During all the years I was away, I dreamed of a night exactly like this, sitting next to you on a porch, with our children sleeping safely in their rooms planning the future together. And now that it's here, it's better than I dreamed," she said. "Because it's real." Michael pulled her closer, and they stayed like that for a few minutes, gently rocking and watching the stars in the clear country sky. "Jennifer," he finally said, "I love you." They were the first words of love he had spoken to her since she had returned. Jennifer felt as if her heart would burst with happiness. "I love you too," she replied. "I never stopped loving you." They kissed then, softly and carefully, like two people who had learned to cherish what they had almost lost forever. The family life that settled in the following weeks was better than any of them had dared to hope. Michael and Jennifer discovered they had developed a complementary nature in areas where they used to compete. He had become more practical and organized, while she had developed more patience and flexibility. The children flourished in the stable environment. Joshua became more confident and sociable, making friends with other children in the area. Emily developed a special love for gardening, spending hours helping Jennifer in the vegetable garden. Mrs. Dorothy integrated into the family routine as if she had always been there. She became the official bedtime storyteller, the advisor on matters of traditional cooking, and the guardian of family memory. Jennifer began giving private lessons as planned, and discovered she had a natural talent for teaching children with learning difficulties. Soon she had a waiting list of parents wanting her services. Michael resumed his previous work, but now with the perspective of someone who had learned to value the balance between work and family. He set clear time boundaries and refused to work on weekends, dedicating that time exclusively to family. But not everything was perfect. As in any real family, there were moments of tension and disagreement. The difference was that now they had learned to handle conflicts constructively instead of destructively. A particularly challenging situation arose when Joshua started having recurring nightmares about fires. It was clear that moving back to the property had awakened traumatic memories he had suppressed during the years in the city. "Daddy, what if our house catches fire again?" he asked one morning after a particularly difficult night. Michael and Jennifer exchanged glances, acknowledging they needed to address the trauma directly and honestly. "Son, we're going to be very honest about this," said Michael, sitting on the bed next to Joshua. "Fires can happen. It's a risk that exists in any home. But we're much more prepared now," added Jennifer. "We have smoke detectors in every room, fire extinguishers, and an emergency plan that the whole family knows." "What kind of plan?" asked the boy, interested. "I'll show you," said Michael. They spent the entire morning creating and practicing an emergency evacuation plan. They mapped out exit routes, established a meeting point in the backyard, and taught the children how to use the safety equipment. Paradoxically, having a concrete plan to deal with the possibility of a fire made Joshua feel safer, not less. He stopped having nightmares because he knew exactly what to do if his worst fantasy became reality. "Sometimes facing fears head-on is better than pretending they don't exist," Jennifer observed to Michael that night. "True, and that applies to more things than just fires," he replied meaningfully. As the months passed, the family developed their own traditions that reflected who they had become. Every Friday was homemade pizza night, where each person chose their own toppings. Sunday mornings were dedicated to working together in the garden and the vegetable patch. Mrs. Dorothy taught everyone how to make traditional regional sweets, passing down recipes that had been handed down for generations. Jennifer documented everything carefully, creating a family recipe book to pass on to the children when they grew up. "One day you'll want to make these recipes for your own children," she explained to Joshua and Emily. "And you'll remember Grandma Dorothy and how happy we were here." The prospect of a future where the children would have their own families was simultaneously exciting and melancholic, but Michael and Jennifer learned to appreciate each phase of family life instead of constantly worrying about what came next. One day, almost a year after moving into the rebuilt house, Mrs. Dorothy asked to have a private conversation with Michael and Jennifer. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice weaker than before. "The doctors told me my time is becoming limited." Michael felt his heart tighten. Although he had suspected for months that Mrs. Dorothy's health was deteriorating, hearing the confirmation was still a shock. "How long?" asked Jennifer softly. "A few months, perhaps a little more," replied the elderly woman. "But I don't want this to be a cause for sadness. I want it to be a cause for celebration." "Celebration?" "Yes, celebration because I got to see you become a real family again. Celebration because I got to be part of this family during the happiest time of my later years," she explained. "When I lost my Paul and my boys, I thought I would never again feel the joy of being part of a family. You gave me that gift." Michael and Jennifer were openly crying now, But Mrs. Dorothy maintained a serene smile. "What can we do to make these months more special for you?" asked Jennifer. "Keep being the wonderful family you've become. Let me be part of a few more birthday parties, a few more Sundays in the garden, a few more nights listening to the children's laughter," she replied. "And when the time comes, don't let it be a trauma for Joshua and Emily. Teach them that passing is part of life and that love continues even when people are gone." This conversation marked the beginning of a period of gradual, conscious farewell. Mrs. Dorothy began sharing more memories, more stories, more wisdom accumulated over a long life full of experiences. She created small handmade gifts for each family member, a photo album of the house construction for Michael, a set of handwritten recipes for Jennifer, a wooden puzzle for Joshua, and a cloth doll for Emily. "I want you to have something made by my hands to remember me by," she explained. The children, in their natural wisdom, seemed to intuitively understand that Mrs. Dorothy was preparing for a farewell. They became even more affectionate and attentive, without anyone needing to ask. "Grandma Dorothy, when you go to heaven, will you take care of our house from there?" Emily asked one day, with the profound simplicity of children. "Yes, I will, my dear granddaughter. I will look after the whole family from here and from wherever I am," the elderly woman promised. Mrs. Dorothy's final months were filled with love, care, and precious memories. She died peacefully on an autumn morning, surrounded by the family she had chosen and who had chosen her back. The funeral was simple but meaningful, with several neighbors from the area who had been touched by Mrs. Dorothy's generosity over the years. Michael and Jennifer discovered that she had discreetly helped many families in need, never seeking recognition or thanks. "She was an angel disguised as a neighbor," commented one of the people present at the funeral. After the funeral, the family needed to learn to live with Mrs. Dorothy's physical absence, but her presence continued to be felt in every corner of the house she had helped rebuild. "She is in the walls of this house," Michael told the children one night when they were particularly missing their adoptive grandmother. "Every brick she helped lay, every coat of paint she helped apply, carries the love she had for us." "And she's in the garden too," added Jennifer. "Every time we pick a fruit from the orange tree or vegetables from the garden, we remember how she taught us to care for the land." Over time, the pain of loss transformed into gratitude for the memories and teachings left behind. The family continued to grow and strengthen, always carrying with them the lessons of unconditional love and generosity that Mrs. Dorothy had demonstrated. Joshua became a responsible and compassionate teenager, always willing to help neighbors in need. Emily grew up with a deep love for nature and gardening, creating increasingly elaborate flower beds around the house. Michael and Jennifer renewed their wedding vows in a simple ceremony in the garden, 5 years after the reconstruction. This time they knew exactly what they were promising each other, and they had the maturity to honor those promises. "I promise to love you not only in the easy times, but especially in the difficult ones," Jennifer said during the ceremony. "I promise to never give up on our family, even when the problems seem too big to solve," Michael replied. They were promises made by people who knew intimately the cost of true love and were willing to pay it. The house that had risen from the ashes of the fire became much more than a home for a family. It became a symbol of second chances, of forgiveness, of love that overcomes adversity. Frequent visitors commented on the special atmosphere of the place, a feeling of peace and welcome that seemed to permeate every room. Michael and Jennifer knew that this atmosphere was not accidental. It was the result of much work, many difficult conversations, many conscious choices to prioritize love over pride. Years later, when Joshua and Emily were adults with their own families, they still gathered at the rebuilt house for important celebrations. The place had become the gravitational center of the extended family, the spot where everyone knew they would always be welcome. "Did you know that Dad and Mom almost sold this house?" Joshua told his own children one night after a Sunday dinner. "Why?" asked the kids, shocked at the possibility. "Because sometimes, when we're very scared or in a lot of pain, we think running away is easier than facing our problems," he explained. "But they learned that some places are too special to abandon." "How do you know a place is special?" asked one of the grandchildren. "When you feel you belong there." when the walls hold happy memories, when you can picture your children and your grandchildren playing in the same garden where you played, replied Joshua, echoing the wisdom that Michael and Jennifer had passed on to him. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of rebuilding and second chances. Do you believe Michael and Jennifer made the right decision by refusing the sale offer? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between financial security and family values? Share your opinion in the comments. We love reading about your experiences. Leave a like if the story touched your heart. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories about family, forgiveness, and new beginnings.